The billionaire mother froze the moment her paralyzed daughter let go of the therapy bars and started moving toward a man she barely knew. Not toward her doctors, not toward her mother. Toward Ethan Walker, a quiet single dad everyone at the rehabilitation center believed was just a maintenance worker. For 3 years, Sophie Bennett had lived inside a wheelchair and behind a silence no amount of money, medicine, or influence could break. Then, on a rain-soaked afternoon in Seattle, one impossible step changed everything. But this story is not only about a child learning to walk again. It is about grief, trust, second chances, and the hidden past of a man who understood survival better than anyone realized. Stay until the end, because what Ethan was hiding changes the meaning of every moment before it. If this story moves you, like the video and tell me in the comments what city and country you're watching from. 6 weeks earlier, none of that had happened yet. There was no impossible walk across a therapy room, no whispered word from Sophie, no reason for Victoria Bennett to know the name Ethan Walker. There was only rain, rain on the windshield, rain sliding down the black windows of the SUV, rain turning the streets outside Seattle into long ribbons of silver beneath the evening lights. Victoria sat in the back seat beside her daughter and watched the city move past without really seeing it. Sophie sat close to the opposite window in her wheelchair, her small black notebook resting on her lap. She was 10 years old now. Her hair fell over one shoulder, dark and straight, and her face had that stillness Victoria had learned not to mistake for peace. 3 years had passed since the accident. 3 years since Sophie had walked into the world as a noisy 7-year-old and come back from it silent. Victoria glanced at the notebook. Sophie had filled half a page with tiny squares. Perfect rows, perfect spacing, each one almost exactly the same size. She drew patterns when she wanted to disappear into something she could control. Victoria understood that better than anyone. She reached across the space between them. "Soph?" Sophie looked up. "We are almost there." A small nod. That was all. The driver turned toward the water. Harbor Point Rehabilitation Center sat on the edge of Lake Washington in a building that looked nothing like the hospitals Victoria had spent the last 3 years learning to hate. There were no towering glass atriums, no white marble, no private entrance for wealthy patients, no wall of framed photographs showing surgeons shaking hands with governors and celebrities. The building was low and wide, made of pale stone and cedar, with tall windows facing the water and a covered entrance where a nurse was helping an elderly man into a car. Victoria had expected something more impressive. That irritated her. Then she immediately disliked herself for thinking it. The driver stopped beneath the awning. One of Victoria's security men opened the door. She stepped out, buttoned her coat, and moved around to Sophie's side before anyone else could touch the wheelchair. "I've got her." The security man stepped back. Victoria unlocked the chair, checked the footrests herself, then pushed Sophie toward the entrance. She had become very good at small physical routines. Chair locks, transfer boards, medication schedules, pressure relief, appointment notes, insurance documentation she did not need but still understood better than some administrators. There had been a time when she could barely fasten the complicated strap system on Sophie's first chair without crying. Now she could do it while taking a call from Tokyo. Competence had always been Victoria's safest place. Inside Harbor Point, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and wet coats. A woman in gray scrubs greeted them at the desk. "Miss Bennett, Victoria is fine." The woman smiled politely. "Dr. Hart is expecting you." Sophie looked toward a large window that opened onto the lake. Rain moved across the water in dark sheets. Victoria watched her daughter's reflection in the glass. The stillness, the notebook, the wheelchair. Some days it was still possible for her mind to reject the picture entirely. Not deny it. Reject it. As if reality had presented evidence that could not possibly belong to her life. There had been another life. She remembered it in fragments. Sophie at 7, barefoot on the kitchen counter, while Michael pretended not to notice she was stealing strawberries. Michael standing in the driveway on Sunday mornings arguing with a garden hose. Sophie singing badly in the back seat. Victoria complaining about the noise while secretly loving every second of it. Wednesday afternoons had belonged to her and Sophie. That was the arrangement. Victoria left work early every Wednesday. No assistants, no driver, no conference calls. Just 40 minutes between school and home. Sophie would climb into the back seat with a backpack that always seemed to contain twice as many objects as necessary and talk without pause. She talked about teachers, friends, lunch, clouds, dogs, why people said sleep like a baby when babies apparently woke up all night. Victoria remembered laughing. She remembered thinking there would always be another Wednesday. The accident happened on one of them. November. Rain. Michael had surprised them by leaving work early too. He had called as Victoria pulled away from Sophie's school. "Where are my favorite people? One of us is driving. That better be you. And one of us is currently trying to convince me that homework is a violation of human rights." From the back seat, Sophie yelled, "It is!" Michael laughed through the speaker. "I'm 5 minutes away, pick me up." They did. That was how Michael ended up in the passenger seat. That was how Victoria ended up driving. The intersection was less than 3 miles from their house. The light was green. Victoria remembered that. For years she had replayed the color in her head. Green. Absolutely green. She remembered Michael turning toward her because Sophie had said something funny. She remembered the reflection of headlights in the side window. Then sound. Metal. Glass. A force so violent that the world stopped behaving like a place governed by ordinary rules. The black SUV came through the red light from the passenger side. Police later estimated it was traveling more than 50 miles an hour. Michael never had time to react. Victoria remembered nothing clearly after impact, only disconnected pieces, airbags, blood in her mouth, the smell of something burned, a stranger shouting, rain falling through a broken window, then Sophie's voice. "Mom!" Victoria tried to turn, pain ripped across her shoulder. "Sophie, Mom, I can't move." Those were the last words Victoria heard her daughter speak for almost 3 years. Michael died before they reached the hospital. Victoria did not know until hours later. By then she had already undergone surgery for internal bleeding and a fractured shoulder. A nurse told her quietly. The room became completely soundless. She remembered staring at the nurse's shoes. White, clean, one lace slightly loose. People talked about grief as if it arrived with screaming. Victoria's did not. It arrived as detail. The loose shoelace, a stain on the ceiling, the digital clock reading 3:17, the sound of a cart moving past the door. Things that should not have mattered became the only things her mind could hold. Sophie was in surgery. That fact kept Victoria upright. For 11 days, the doctors used language that sounded almost merciful because none of it contained certainty. Incomplete spinal cord injury, swelling, nerve trauma, response unknown, recovery window, rehabilitation potential. Victoria learned every term. She wrote them down. She researched them. She demanded explanations when answers sounded vague. She made lists. She called specialists. She built a plan before Sophie had even left intensive care. That was what Victoria Bennett did when reality became intolerable. She turned it into work. But the first time Sophie opened her eyes after surgery, Victoria sat beside her bed and whispered, "I'm right here, baby." Sophie looked at her. No response. Victoria assumed she was exhausted. The next day, still nothing. A week later, nothing. Sophie could nod, shake her head, follow instructions, write short answers once her hand strength returned. But she would not speak. Not to nurses, not to doctors, not to Victoria. At first everyone said not to pressure her. Trauma could affect children in strange ways. Give her time. Then weeks became months. The psychologists used terms: acute stress response, selective mutism, trauma avoidance, complicated grief. Victoria hated every phrase. They sounded too clean, too organized. There was nothing organized about sitting outside your daughter's room at 2 a.m. and pressing your forehead against the glass because she would not let you sit beside her while she cried. There was nothing clinical about hearing your own child make no sound for so long that you began forgetting the exact texture of her voice. Victoria remembered Sophie's voice anyway. She carried it in her head like contraband. The high laugh, the dramatic sigh, the way she used to stretch the word mom into 3 syllables when she wanted something. Sometimes Victoria would play old videos on her phone after Sophie went to sleep. Never where Sophie could see. Birthday parties, beach trips, Christmas mornings, Michael's voice in the background, Sophie's voice filling every room. Then Victoria would turn the phone off and sit in the dark. The rehabilitation programs began as soon as Sophie was medically stable. Seattle first, then San Francisco. Boston, Chicago. A pediatric neurological program in New York. A specialist in Switzerland. Victoria paid whatever was asked. She donated to research programs. She funded equipment a hospital claimed it could not afford. She spoke to surgeons whose waiting lists were measured in years and had Sophie seen in weeks. Everywhere she went, she heard variations of the same sentence. There is reason to continue therapy. There are no guarantees. After 12 months, the optimism changed shape. The language became softer. Progress may be limited. Functional adaptation can become the goal. We should think about quality of life. At 18 months, one neurologist finally said what the others had been circling. Ms. Bennett, there comes a point where hope can become another form of pressure. Victoria stared at him across his desk. My daughter is 8. I know. You are asking me to accept that she will never walk again. I'm asking you to consider that accepting her current condition is not the same as giving up on her. Victoria stood. The conversation ended there. She did not scream. She did not threaten. She simply thanked him for his time and never returned. That night, she sat beside Sophie in a hotel room overlooking the Charles River. Sophie was drawing in her notebook. Victoria stared at her own hands. She wanted to say, I will fix this. The sentence had been sitting inside her for months, but she could no longer bear how false it sounded. So she said nothing. Sophie looked up. For a second, their eyes met. Then Sophie went back to drawing. That hurt more. Bennett Dynamics continued growing through all of it. Markets did not care about grief. Acquisitions did not pause for hospital appointments. Shareholders did not stop asking questions because Victoria slept 4 hours a night. She learned how to run a company from waiting rooms. She approved contracts from therapy hallways. She negotiated a merger while Sophie slept beside her after an exhausting session in Boston. People called her extraordinary. She wanted to hit them when they did. There was nothing extraordinary about it. She was surviving 2 lives at once. One where everyone expected her to know what to do. One where she had no idea. Harbor Point came into their lives because of Dr. Elena Hart. The first message arrived through Victoria's assistant. Victoria ignored it. Then a second one came, not from a marketing office, from Hart herself. She had reviewed anonymized data from Sophie's case after consulting on a pediatric rehabilitation study. She believed some earlier sensory results deserved another look. Victoria called her from the back seat of a car between meetings. What exactly are you telling me? I'm telling you that I don't know. Victoria almost hung up. Hart continued. That is why I want to evaluate her. I have 11 specialists who don't know. I'm not asking you to trust a 12th specialist. I'm asking you to let me look at the patient instead of the conclusions. Victoria became quiet. That sentence stayed with her. 3 weeks later, they were in Seattle. Dr. Hart met them in a consultation room overlooking the water. She was in her early 50s, compact silver beginning at her temples, glasses resting low on her nose. She did not seem impressed by Victoria's name. That helped. Hart read through the case notes for nearly 20 minutes before speaking. Sophie has had excellent care. Victoria said nothing. That's not a diplomatic answer, I mean it. Then why are we here? Hart closed the file. Because excellent care can still become repetitive. Victoria leaned back. Hart continued. Every team inherits assumptions from the team before it. A finding gets labeled insignificant. The next person reads the label instead of reconsidering the finding. That doesn't mean anyone did something wrong. People keep saying that to me. Because sometimes it is true. Victoria studied her. I don't want comfort. Good. I'm not very good at providing it. For the first time that day, Victoria almost smiled. Hart explained Harbor Point's approach. Lower intensity, more frequent sensory work, less emphasis on pushing major muscle groups, more attention to residual sensation and voluntary intent. No promise of walking, no promise of speech, no promise at all. Victoria looked toward Sophie, who sat near the window drawing. What do you think? Sophie continued drawing. Victoria waited. Finally, Sophie wrote something. She turned the notebook around. Try. One word. Victoria nodded. Then we try. The first week was uneventful. Sophie worked with Dr. Maya Reynolds, a physical therapist with a calm voice and a habit of explaining every movement before touching her. Victoria liked that. Sophie tolerated it. Tolerance was different from engagement. Victoria knew the distinction intimately. Sophie moved through each session with the same detached obedience she had shown at every hospital. Lift, hold, rest, breathe. Again, nothing appeared to reach her. By the fifth day, Victoria could feel the old frustration returning. Not at Sophie, never Sophie, at the process, at fluorescent rooms, at charts, at people writing numbers beside her daughter's name, at the endless performance of progress when nobody could tell her whether anything had actually changed. After a morning session, Maya approached her in the hallway. She worked hard today. Victoria looked through the glass at Sophie. No, she complied. Maya hesitated. Victoria continued. She knows the difference. So do I. Maya nodded slowly. Fair. That answer made Victoria like her more. During the second week, Victoria began taking business calls from a small lounge near the therapy wing. She tried to remain physically nearby without hovering. Sophie noticed hovering. She noticed everything. One Tuesday afternoon, Victoria's CFO called about an acquisition issue that could not wait. She stood beside Sophie's wheelchair near a long hallway window. 5 minutes. Sophie gave her a look. Victoria sighed. 10. A tiny eyebrow lift. 12. Final offer. Sophie almost smiled. Victoria walked around the corner and answered. The call took 19 minutes. When she returned, she expected to find Sophie drawing. Instead, her daughter was sitting completely still, notebook open, pen resting between her fingers. She was staring through the partially open door of a small therapy room across the corridor. Victoria followed her gaze. Inside was a boy of about 8, standing on a foam platform. A physical therapist was nowhere in sight. Beside the boy crouched a man Victoria had seen several times around the building. Dark hair, broad shoulders, gray Harbor Point shirt, work pants. Maintenance staff, she assumed. The boy stared at the floor. I'm going to fall. The man did not contradict him. You might. The boy looked offended. That is not helpful. The man smiled. No, lying to you wouldn't be helpful. The boy looked down again. I hate this. I know. My leg feels weird. I know. What if I can't do it? The man leaned his forearms against his knees. Then we find out what you can do. The boy swallowed. The man nodded toward his left foot. Move that one first. I can't. Don't move the whole foot. The boy frowned. What? Give me the heel. The boy stared at him. Just the heel, 1 inch. The boy tried. Nothing. He tried again. The heel shifted barely. The boy's eyes widened. The man did not clap. He did not say amazing. He did not call anyone over. He simply nodded. There. The boy looked at him. That counted. It moved. It was tiny. Still moved. The boy looked down again. The man said, now do it like it was normal. The boy laughed. It isn't normal. No, but the movement is real. That's enough for today. Sophie watched every second. Victoria watched Sophie. That was what caught her attention. Not the man. Her daughter. There was something different in Sophie's face. Not excitement. Not hope. Victoria had learned to distrust both because adults projected them onto children too easily. It was curiosity. Real curiosity. The kind Sophie used to have before the accident. The kind that made her ask 20 questions about why birds could sit on power lines without dying. Victoria had not seen that expression in months. The man helped the boy sit. Then he picked up a resistance band from the floor and placed it back on a shelf. He looked toward the hallway. His eyes met Sophie's. He did not smile sympathetically. He did not tilt his head. He did not soften his expression. He gave her one ordinary nod. Afternoon. Then he walked out through another door. Sophie watched the empty doorway. Victoria approached slowly. You okay? Sophie nodded. Did you know that boy? A head shake. Victoria looked toward the therapy room. What were you watching? Sophie lowered her eyes to the notebook. For a moment, Victoria assumed she would return to her pattern. Instead, Sophie wrote. She turned the page around. Who is he? Victoria read it twice. The man, Sophie nodded. I don't know. Sophie looked toward the corridor where he had disappeared. Victoria studied her. Why? Sophie hesitated. Her pen touched the paper, stopped, started again. She wrote slowly this time. The man who doesn't look sorry for me. Victoria stared at the sentence. Something tightened behind her ribs. She looked down the hallway. Empty now. Only the sound of rain against the glass. Only nurses moving between rooms. Only equipment carts. Only another ordinary afternoon inside another rehabilitation center. But Victoria closed Sophie's notebook gently and rested her hand on the chair handle. "Okay," she said. Sophie looked up. Victoria kept her voice light. "I'll find out his name." Sophie gave one small nod. They started toward the elevators. At the far end of the hallway through the glass doors near the service corridor, Victoria caught one brief glimpse of the man again. He was kneeling beside a broken wheelchair lift with a toolbox open at his feet. Nothing about the scene looked unusual. Nothing about him looked important. Sophie turned in her chair and watched him until the elevator doors closed. The next morning, Sophie was already looking toward the service corridor before Victoria had even finished signing them in. Victoria noticed. She noticed everything about her daughter now. The direction of her eyes. How quickly she reached for the notebook. Whether her hands were still or restless. Whether she looked at a person once or twice. 3 years of silence had turned observation into a second language. Victoria followed Sophie's gaze. No gray shirt, no broad shoulders, no maintenance cart. Just a nurse pushing a supply bin past the elevators. Sophie looked away. Victoria said nothing. They went through the morning session with Maya, supported transfers, sensory work, controlled weight shifts. Sophie complied. Victoria sat behind the glass with a tablet open on her lap, pretending to read quarterly projections. Her eyes kept returning to the hallway. At 11:40, she saw him. The maintenance man from the day before walked out of an equipment room carrying a folded hydraulic support frame over one shoulder. He moved like the weight did not matter. Not rushed, not casual either, controlled. He set the frame beside a therapy table, checked a locking mechanism, spoke briefly with a nurse, then crouched to inspect one of the wheels. Victoria closed the tablet. She stood. Maya looked through the glass. "You need something." "I'll be back." Victoria crossed the hallway. The man was tightening something beneath the frame when her shoes stopped beside his toolbox. He looked up. Up close, he was older than Victoria had first thought. Late 30s, maybe. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes and a small pale scar just below his right ear. His hair was dark with a little gray near the temples. He did not immediately stand. "Can I help you?" Victoria glanced at the name embroidered on his shirt. "Ethan." "Are you Ethan Walker?" "Depends who's asking." It was not flirtation. It was dry enough that Victoria almost missed the humor. "Victoria Bennett. I know." That irritated her more than it should have. Most people reacted when they heard her name. A shift in posture, an extra smile, recognition, calculation. Ethan simply went back to the locking mechanism. Victoria folded her arms. "My daughter noticed you yesterday. That sounds serious." She asked who you were. This time Ethan looked up. His expression changed very slightly. "Your daughter is Sophie." "Yes, I've seen her around." "You were helping a boy in therapy 3. Ben. Are you one of his therapists?" "No." "Then why were you doing therapy with him?" "I wasn't." Victoria glanced toward the frame. "You were telling him how to move his heel." His therapist had stepped out to get an ankle support. He was nervous. I was keeping him from getting off the platform. "You told him what movement to try." "I told him to move his heel." "That sounds like therapy." Ethan stood. He was taller than she expected. Victoria was not easily physically intimidated, but there was something about him that changed the size of the hallway. Not aggression, presence. He wiped his hands on a shop towel. "I work facilities." "I can read the shirt." "Good. Saves time." Victoria stared at him. Ethan looked past her toward the therapy room. Sophie was watching them through the glass. Ethan gave her the same small nod as the day before. Sophie did not look away. Victoria noticed that, too. "How long have you worked here?" 10 months. Before that, other things." "What things?" He looked back at her. "You always interview maintenance staff." "Only the ones my daughter takes an interest in." That stopped him. Victoria continued. "She has not taken an interest in many people lately." Ethan's expression lost its humor. He glanced at Sophie again. "How old is she?" 10. "How long has she been in the chair?" 3 years. Ethan gave a small nod. He did not say he was sorry. Victoria noticed that most of all. She remembered Sophie's sentence from the notebook. The man who doesn't look sorry for me. Do you have children? 1. How old? 9. Boy or girl? Boy. For a moment something softer appeared in Ethan's face. Then it disappeared. Victoria asked, Do you ever work directly with patients? No, never. Not officially. That is not what I asked. A corner of his mouth moved. No, not never. What does that mean? It means sometimes a kid is having a rough day and I happen to be standing there. With specific advice about movement. I've had some experience. What kind? Ethan folded the shop towel and set it on the toolbox. Physical conditioning. Where? He paused. Military. The word landed differently than Victoria expected. Not because it was surprising, because it explained something she had already sensed without naming. The stillness, the posture, the strange confidence around falling bodies. What branch? Navy. How long? Long enough. Victoria studied him. That is an evasive answer. It is also an answer. She should have walked away. She had a board call in 20 minutes. Sophie had another session after lunch. Her assistant had already texted twice about a contract review. Instead, she heard herself say, I want you to spend 20 minutes with her. Ethan's face became completely still. No. Victoria blinked. No. Why, because I am not her therapist. I know that. I'm not a doctor. I know that too. Then you know why. Victoria lowered her voice. My daughter has seen neurologists in 4 states. She has worked with pediatric specialists who publish research other doctors build programs around. She has had private consultations with people who charge more for 45 minutes than some families make in a month. Ethan said nothing. Yesterday she watched you for less than 10 minutes. He looked toward Sophie. Victoria continued. Last night she wrote 1 sentence about you. Ethan looked back at her. What sentence? Victoria hesitated. It felt private. Then she answered. She said you were the man who did not look sorry for her. Something moved in Ethan's expression. Very small, but real. Victoria saw it. He glanced toward this glass again. Sophie was still watching. Ethan exhaled slowly. 20 minutes. Victoria did not move. That's it. Fine. I don't make promises. Good. I don't tell her she is going to walk. Good. And if I think this is a bad idea after 5 minutes, I stop. Victoria nodded. When? Ethan checked the clock on the wall. I get off at 4. I'll have her here. I wasn't asking you to rearrange her schedule. You said 4. A faint hint of amusement returned. Right. He picked up the toolbox. Victoria stepped aside. Ethan started walking away. Mr. Walker. He turned. Thank you. Ethan looked at her for a second. Don't thank me yet. Then he disappeared into the equipment room. At 4:03, Victoria sat outside therapy room 4 with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Sophie was inside. Ethan had asked Victoria not to sit in the room. He had not asked rudely. That somehow made it harder to argue. Maya stood beside Victoria. You look like you're waiting for a hostage negotiation. Victoria kept her eyes on the glass. Do you trust him? Maya thought about it. I trust Dr. Hart. That was not my question. Maya sighed. I have seen Ethan around patients for months. He never oversteps when clinical staff are present. He asks good questions. Better questions than I expected from someone in facilities. That is not exactly reassuring. No. Victoria glanced at her. Maya added, but Sophie agreed to go in. That mattered. Inside, Ethan rolled a low stool toward Sophie. He sat. Not across the room. Not too close. At eye level. Sophie held the notebook in both hands. Ethan did not ask for it. He did not introduce himself with the exaggerated warmth adults often used with children in medical settings. I'm Ethan. Sophie looked at him. You're Sophie. A small nod. You don't have to talk. Her fingers tightened around the notebook. Ethan rested his forearms on his knees. You don't have to write either. Sophie studied him. He waited. The silence stretched. Victoria shifted outside the door. Maya touched her arm. Don't. Victoria looked at her. Maya whispered, Let it be awkward. Inside, Ethan reached for a small rubber therapy ball and rolled it slowly between his palms. I am going to ask you a strange question. Sophie waited. Is there anywhere below your waist where you can tell the difference between warm and cold? Her eyes changed. She looked down at her legs, then at Ethan. He continued. Not pressure, not pain, temperature. Sophie opened the notebook. She wrote, sometimes. Ethan nodded. Where? Sophie pointed to the outside of her right knee. He leaned closer but did not touch her. Here. She moved his finger slightly lower without actually touching his hand. There, she nodded. Anywhere else? She shook her head. Ethan looked toward the door. Maya opened it. What do you need? Cold pack, small one. Maya brought it. Ethan wrapped it in a thin towel. He held it where Sophie could see. I'm going to touch the area you showed me. If you feel cold, raise one finger. If you feel pressure but not cold, raise two. If you feel nothing, don't move. Sophie nodded. Ethan applied the pack. One finger rose. He moved it an inch. Nothing. Back. One finger. Lower. Two fingers. Back. One finger. He repeated the pattern several times. Victoria watched his face. He was not encouraging Sophie. He was measuring her, but not with the cold distance of someone collecting data, with the focus of someone listening for a sound buried beneath noise. Ethan looked at Maya. When was sensation mapped last? 2 months before admission. Detailed. Standard dermatomal testing. Do you have it? Yes. Bring it. Victoria frowned. Maya left and returned with a tablet. She opened a scanned neurological chart. Ethan studied it. His eyes moved quickly over the page. He pointed to one section. This was marked inconsistent. Maya leaned closer. Yes. Why? Responses varied across repetitions. How much? Maya scrolled. She identified cold correctly 4 out of 10 attempts. Ethan looked at Sophie. Was she fatigued when they tested you? Sophie shrugged. He took the notebook. Write yes if you remember being tired. Sophie wrote, very. Ethan nodded. Maya folded her arms. What are you thinking? Nothing yet. He returned to the cold pack. This time he asked Sophie to close her eyes. Same rules. He changed the order. Near the knee, one finger, farther down, nothing, back, one finger, he repeated it. Then changed temperature, warm pack, same region, one finger. Victoria could see Maya's expression shifting. Not excitement, attention. Ethan stopped. He did not touch Sophie again. That's enough. Victoria opened the door before anyone could tell her not to. What did you find? Ethan stood. I didn't find anything. You spent 20 minutes testing 1 square inch of her knee. Closer to 3 square inches. Victoria stared at him. Maya hid a smile. Ethan handed her the tablet. This region was labeled inconsistent because the old test got weak responses. So weak is not the same as random. Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. What are you saying? I'm saying if a response happens in the same place under the same conditions, somebody should confirm whether it is signal or coincidence. Maya said, her previous EMG did show irregular activity around the upper lumbar pathways. Victoria turned toward her. You told me that was insignificant. I told you it was interpreted as insignificant. By whom? Her previous team. Ethan raised one hand. Nobody needs to be blamed. Victoria looked at him. I did not say anything about blame. You were about to. She hated that he was right. Ethan continued. If this is real, we test it again. If it isn't, we know. That is all. Victoria looked at Sophie. For once, Sophie was not drawing. She was watching Ethan. What exactly should they test? Ethan looked at Maya. Repeat sensory mapping. Then look again at the L3 and L4 distribution. I would also want the old nerve conduction records compared directly instead of relying on the summary. Maya's eyebrows rose. You know dermatomes. A little. You know nerve conduction studies. A little. Victoria gave him a flat look. You seem to know many things a little. Ethan shrugged. Useful habit. Dr. Hart reviewed the session notes that evening. By the following morning, she had ordered repeat testing. Victoria arrived before 7. Sophie was still half asleep. The sky outside Harbor Point was dark blue and gray. Victoria had coffee in one hand and 3 missed calls on her phone. Dr. Hart found her in the lobby. You are early. You called me at 6:14. I did. What happened? Hart motioned toward her office. Victoria followed. Sophie remained outside with an aide drawing at a small table. Hart closed the door. The repeat mapping showed a consistent temperature response along a narrow lateral region of Sophie's right leg. Victoria stayed still, and we reviewed the previous nerve conduction data. And Hart took off her glasses. There is a weak residual signal. Victoria said nothing. Hart continued carefully. It was present in an earlier test, but it was interpreted as artifact. Noise, essentially. But it might not have been. Correct. Victoria felt something cold move through her stomach. How did 11 specialists miss it? Hart's voice remained calm. They may not have missed it. They may have interpreted it differently based on the larger clinical picture. That sounds like a nicer way of saying they missed it. It is a more accurate way. Victoria got up and walked toward the window. Below them, an employee crossed the courtyard carrying a ladder. Rain had started again. Of course it had. What does the signal mean? It means there may be surviving communication through pathways that were assumed to have little functional relevance. Victoria turned. Can she walk? I do not know. Can she regain more movement? I do not know. Then tell me what you do know. Hart leaned forward. I know the question is different today than it was yesterday. Victoria stared at her. That was enough. It was not hope. She did not trust hope anymore, but it was movement, not in Sophie's legs, in the answer. Victoria picked up her phone. I want Ethan Walker in this room. Hart blinked. Victoria. He found this. He noticed something. Fine. I want the man who noticed something in this room. Ethan is maintenance staff. Victoria looked directly at her. I know what his shirt says. Hart was silent. Victoria continued. I also know 3 years of people with the correct titles did not make me ask this question. Hart studied her for several seconds. Then she picked up the phone. The meeting happened at 4:30. Dr. Hart, Maya, Victoria, Ethan. He sat closest to the door. Victoria noticed that. The room had 6 chairs. He chose the one with the clearest path out. She filed the detail away. Hart placed the updated results on the table. The residual response is weak but reproducible. Ethan read through the report. He did not look surprised. Maya watched him. Why did you ask specifically about temperature? Ethan kept reading. Different input, meaning people get used to pressure testing, especially kids who have done years of rehab. They anticipate contact. Temperature gives you another pathway to compare. Maya leaned forward. Where did you learn that? A pause. Recovery work. In the Navy. Ethan looked at her. Mostly, Victoria said. Mostly? He ignored the question. Hart tapped the report. We need to decide what this actually changes. Ethan placed the document on the table. What has her program focused on? Maya opened Sophie's therapy notes. Major muscle recruitment, core stabilization, supported standing, bilateral weight bearing, electrical stimulation twice weekly. How long? At Harbor Point 3 weeks. Before that. Maya glanced at Victoria. Variations of the same approach for most of the last 3 years. Ethan nodded. What has consistently responded? Upper body compensation. No, below the injury. Maya looked through the notes. Very little. The lateral region. We have not specifically isolated it. Ethan leaned back. Then start there. Hart asked. With what goal? Communication. Victoria frowned. Between what? Her brain and the area that still answers. Maya crossed her arms. That is a simple way of describing an extremely complicated process. Simple does not mean wrong. Maya looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Fair. Ethan continued. Right now, everyone keeps asking Sophie's nervous system for a large answer. Lift the leg, hold weight, activate major muscle groups. Maybe she does not have enough connection for a large answer yet. Hart said, so you want smaller recruitment. Much smaller. How small? Small enough that nobody watching from across the room would call it progress. Victoria did not like that sentence. Ethan looked at her. You want visible change. I want meaningful change. Those aren't always the same thing. Victoria held his gaze. Explain. Ethan pointed to the report. If she can create a repeatable response in one area, even a tiny one, then you build around that. You do it over and over, same signal, same intent, same feedback. You give the brain a reason to keep trying the route. Maya asked. How often? More often than now. Lower intensity. That sounds backward. Only if intensity is helping. Maya looked toward Victoria. It has caused shutdown before. Victoria's expression tightened. Ethan noticed. What does shutdown mean? Maya answered. She stops engaging, refuses tasks, sometimes for days. Ethan nodded slowly. Then you are not fighting one injury. No one spoke. He continued. You are fighting the injury, her memory of failure, her expectation of being watched, and 3 years of adults reacting every time something does or does not happen. Victoria's shoulders stiffened. That felt directed at her. Maybe it was. Ethan turned to Hart. 40 minutes in the morning, narrow sensory work, low load, no cheering, no promises. Victoria said, no cheering. Ethan looked at her. If she moves a toe and everyone in the room starts crying, what does she learn? Victoria did not answer. She learns every movement belongs to us. That landed. Ethan continued. It needs to belong to her. Maya asked, afternoons. Water, if she tolerates it. We have a therapy pool. Good. Buoyancy reduces load. It also reduces the fear of falling. Hart made notes. You are speaking as if you have designed this before. Ethan's eyes moved toward the door. Versions of it. With whom? He paused. People with injuries. Victoria said, military injuries. Ethan looked at her. Some. Combat. His face closed. Hart intervened. I think we have enough to begin without turning this into an interrogation. Victoria leaned back. Ethan gave Hart a grateful look that lasted less than a second. Maya studied the report. I am willing to try it. Hart nodded. Document everything. Victoria asked, and Ethan, Hart looked at him. He observes, he advises, he does not perform clinical procedures. Ethan said fine. Hart pointed at him, and you do not improvise with Sophie alone. Also fine. Victoria almost smiled. He accepted limits more easily than most powerful men she knew. That made her trust him more. The program began the next morning. It looked ridiculous. That was Victoria's first private reaction. 40 minutes of attention directed toward an area smaller than Sophie's hand. Warm, cold, pressure, release, intent, rest, again. No dramatic exercise, no exhausting machine, no therapist shouting encouragement. Ethan sat to one side while Maya led. Sometimes he said nothing for 20 minutes. Sometimes he asked one question. What did she do with her toes when she felt that Maya would look? They would repeat it. Most of the time, nothing happened. Victoria hated those mornings, not because they were hard, because they looked like nothing. She had spent her entire career measuring progress, revenue, growth, retention, acquisition value. Numbers moved or they did not. Here, an entire morning could be considered useful because Sophie accurately identified temperature 7 times instead of 5. Victoria had to teach herself not to demand more. She failed often. One morning she stood outside the room watching Sophie attempt the same tiny movement for the 20th time. Her phone vibrated. Jonathan Pierce. She rejected the call. It rang again. She rejected it again. Inside, Sophie closed her eyes. Maya touched the lateral knee. Now. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Ethan watched Sophie's face. Stop. Maya looked at him. She has 3 minutes. Stop. Victoria opened the door. Why? Ethan pointed at Sophie. Look at her jaw. Victoria did. Sophie's teeth were clenched. Her shoulders had risen. Ethan said, she is not practicing the movement anymore. She is practicing frustration. Maya lowered her hands. Session over. Sophie opened her eyes. She looked relieved. That hurt Victoria. Outside the room, she confronted Ethan. We are ending sessions because she is frustrated. We are ending them before frustration becomes the session. She has spent 3 years doing difficult things. Exactly. Victoria stared at him. He lowered his voice. You keep treating endurance like it is the same thing as recovery. The words hit harder than she expected. My daughter is still here because she endured. I know. You don't know anything about what she endured." Ethan's face changed. The humor vanished, the softness too. For 1 second, Victoria saw something underneath him, something colder, older. "I know enough." He walked away. Victoria watched him go. She should have been angry. Instead, she was curious. Again. That afternoon, Sophie was waiting near the lobby when a boy dropped a backpack beside the chair across from her. He had dark hair, untied sneakers, and the exhausted expression of a child who had been in school all day and did not consider this building interesting. He looked at Sophie, then at her notebook. "Do you draw or write?" Sophie looked at him. He pointed. "The notebook." She wrote. "Both." He nodded seriously. "Good. People who only write are usually boring." Sophie stared at him for a second, then wrote, "You write. Only when teachers force me." She wrote again, "So you are boring." The boy blinked, then laughed. "Okay, that was rude." Sophie almost smiled. Victoria stood 20 feet away, pretending to read an email. The boy dropped into the chair opposite Sophie. "I'm Caleb." Sophie wrote her name. "I know." Her eyebrows rose. "My dad works here." He pointed down the hall. Ethan appeared from the service corridor carrying 2 coffees in a paper bag. "Caleb." "What?" "Homework. I am socializing. Homework while socializing." Caleb groaned. Ethan noticed Sophie, then Victoria. "Afternoon." Victoria nodded. Caleb pointed at Sophie. "She called me boring." Ethan handed him the paper bag. "Probably earned it?" Sophie smiled, actually smiled. Victoria's chest tightened. Ethan saw it too. He did not react. That somehow made the moment safer. Caleb pulled out a sandwich. He looked at Sophie's chair. Victoria braced herself. Children asked questions, some innocent, some cruel without meaning to be. Caleb pointed at the wheels. "Can you do wheelies?" Sophie stared at him, then slowly wrote. "Yes." Caleb's eyes widened. "Seriously," she wrote. "No." He frowned. Sophie smiled again. Ethan looked away to hide his own. Victoria watched him. He was a different person around his son, still quiet, still controlled, but warmer, more ordinary. Caleb opened his backpack. A science worksheet fell onto the floor. Ethan picked it up. Photosynthesis. "Don't say it like you know what it means." "I know what photosynthesis means." "You fix toilets." Victoria looked at Ethan. He looked at Caleb. "I also know where you sleep." Caleb nodded. "Fair." Sophie covered her mouth. A silent laugh. The sight almost broke Victoria. Not because Sophie had laughed, because it had happened without anyone trying to make it happen. Over the next several days, Caleb appeared twice more after school. His usual aftercare program was temporarily closed for renovations. He sat in the lobby, did homework, read, argued with Sophie through her notebook. He never treated her silence as a problem. If writing took time, he waited. If she ignored him, he talked anyway. He told her about a classmate who had glued 2 fingers together, a teacher who drank 6 cups of coffee before lunch, a dog he wanted but Ethan refused to let him have. Ethan always corrected that point. "I did not refuse. You said no. I said we would discuss it when you remember to feed yourself without reminders." "That is basically no," Sophie wrote. "Get the dog." Caleb pointed at the page. "See?" Ethan looked at Sophie. "Do not join his campaign." She wrote. Too late. Victoria saw a change in Sophie that therapy notes could not capture. She began arriving earlier. She asked which days Caleb would be there. She looked for Ethan. Not with dependence, with interest. One afternoon, Victoria sat with Ethan in the cafeteria while Sophie and Caleb worked on a puzzle at another table. Victoria had coffee. Ethan had coffee. Neither touched it. "You are good with children." Ethan looked toward Caleb. "I have one. Practice helps." "Your wife?" The question came out before Victoria decided whether she should ask it. Ethan's face became still. Victoria immediately knew. "I'm sorry. She died 2 years ago. Cancer." He looked at her. "How did you know?" "The way you answered." He gave a small nod. "Yeah." Victoria looked toward Caleb. He was 7. 7 when she died. 6 when she got sick. That is young. Any age is young for that. Victoria understood. She looked down at her coffee. Michael died in the crash. I know. How? Caleb asked why Sophie did not have a dad around. I told him it wasn't his question to ask. He figured it out. Victoria nodded. For a while, neither spoke. The silence felt different from the silences she knew. Not empty, not hostile, simply allowed. Ethan broke it. Does she remember him? Everything. That can be harder. Victoria looked at him. Why? Because people think remembering is always comforting. He watched Caleb struggle with the puzzle. Sometimes it is just another way to miss someone. Victoria did not know what to say, so she did not say anything. For once, she let silence remain what it was. At the end of the third week, Maya texted Victoria during a board meeting, "Can you come down?" Victoria read the message twice. She stood. Jonathan Pierce's face filled the conference screen. Victoria, continue without me. We are discussing the acquisition structure. Then discuss it. She closed the laptop. 4 minutes later, she was inside Harbor Point. Maya stood outside therapy room 4. Her eyes were bright. Victoria slowed. What happened? Maya lowered her voice. Sophie moved her foot. Victoria stopped. What? Right foot, maybe an inch. A reflex. No. Are you sure? I am sure. Victoria looked through the glass. Sophie sat on the low therapy platform. Ethan was crouched several feet away. No one was celebrating. No balloons, no applause, no tears. Just Sophie staring at her right foot like it belonged to someone else. Victoria's hand rose to her mouth. Did she do it again? Maya shook her head. Not yet. Victoria moved toward the door. Maya stopped her. Ethan wants another 5 minutes. Victoria stared at her. She moved her foot. I know. I am her mother. I know. Victoria looked through the glass again. Ethan said something. Sophie frowned. She closed her eyes. Victoria waited. 1 minute, 2, 3, nothing. Sophie opened her eyes, angry now. She grabbed her notebook, wrote hard enough that Victoria could see the pressure of the pen from outside. She shoved the notebook toward Ethan. He read it. No, it isn't good enough. Ethan looked at her. He did not soften his voice. You're right. Sophie blinked. He continued. You wanted to do it again. She nodded sharply. And you couldn't. Another nod. That feels terrible. She nodded. Ethan sat on the floor. Be mad. Sophie stared. Seriously? She looked at the notebook, then at him. Be mad. Hate today if you want. He pointed toward her foot. But that moved. Sophie looked down. Ethan continued. You don't get to erase something real because you wanted more. Her face tightened. He stood. Come back tomorrow. Sophie wrote. What if it doesn't move? Ethan read it. Then you come back the day after that. She stared at him. He handed the notebook back. No deal with the future, just tomorrow. Sophie looked at the page. Then she nodded. Ethan opened the door. Victoria stood there. For a second, she did not trust herself to speak. She went inside. Sophie looked at her. Victoria wanted to fall to her knees, wanted to grab her, wanted to ask her to do it again. Instead, she sat beside the platform. Morning session done. Sophie nodded. Victoria swallowed. Hungry? A pause. Then another nod. Victoria smiled. Good, I'm starving. Sophie picked up the notebook. She wrote something, held it out. Can Ethan and Caleb come? Victoria looked across the room. Ethan was putting equipment away. He had clearly read the question from where he stood. He pretended not to. Victoria looked back at Sophie. I'll ask. Sophie closed the notebook. The 4 of them ended up at a small diner 3 blocks from Harbor Point. Not one of the restaurants Victoria usually entered. No reservation, no private room, no staff who recognized her immediately. Just red vinyl booths. Coffee that came in thick white mugs and windows fogged by the warmth inside. Caleb ordered pancakes even though it was nearly 1 in the afternoon. Ethan said no. Caleb said, you said I could pick. I assumed lunch. Pancakes are food. That is not a defense. Victoria looked at the waitress. He can have pancakes. Ethan looked at her. You are undermining me. Consider it philanthropy. Caleb pointed at Victoria. I like her. Sophie laughed silently. Ethan sighed. 2 against 1. Victoria corrected him. 3. Sophie tapped the table and wrote. 4. Ethan read it. His eyes moved to her. Something softened. Fine. 4. The waitress walked away. For the first time in years, Victoria sat at a table that almost felt ordinary. 2 children. Too much sugar. Bad coffee. A man across from her who seemed more comfortable facing a frightened child than ordering lunch. She watched Ethan reach automatically for Caleb's water before the boy could knock it over. He caught the glass without looking. Victoria noticed. Again. Fast hands, calm reflex, perfect timing. Ethan looked up and caught her watching. What? Nothing. You keep looking at me like I'm evidence. Occupational habit. You investigate people for work. I investigate everything for work. That sounds exhausting. It is useful. Those can both be true. Sophie was listening. Victoria changed the subject. How long were you in the Navy? Ethan took a drink of coffee. 14 years. Caleb looked up from his pancakes. 15 if you count training. Ethan glanced at him. We don't count training. Why? Because I said so. Caleb shrugged and returned to the syrup. Victoria said, 14 years is not a little physical conditioning. Ethan did not answer. What did you do? He looked at Sophie, then Caleb, then back at Victoria. Different things. That is another evasive answer. You're collecting those. Caleb spoke around a bite of pancake. Dad doesn't talk about the Navy. Ethan gave him a look. What? She asked. Victoria smiled faintly. He's right. Ethan shook his head. Sophie wrote something. Why did you leave? The table became quiet. Victoria immediately regretted letting the conversation go there. Ethan read the notebook. He took his time. Then he looked at Sophie. My wife got sick. Sophie lowered her eyes. Ethan continued. She needed me home. Caleb needed me home. Caleb stopped eating, only for a moment. Then he took another bite. Sophie wrote, I'm sorry. Ethan read it. Thank you. He reached for his coffee. Then he looked at Sophie. I'm sorry about your dad. Sophie went still. Victoria's breath caught. She had not heard Michael referenced so directly by another adult in front of Sophie in months. Most people avoided it. They said the accident, your loss, what happened. Never Michael, never Dad. Sophie looked down at the notebook. For several seconds she did nothing. Then she nodded. Not politely, not automatically, slowly. Her eyes stayed on Ethan. He did not say anything else. He did not rescue the moment. Caleb pushed the syrup toward Sophie. Do you want some? She looked at him, then at the pancakes she had not ordered. She wrote, Those are yours. I have 4. She wrote, You ordered too many. I was emotional. Sophie looked at him for a second, then took one. The tension broke. Victoria watched Ethan. He was looking at the children, not at her. She wondered how many quiet decisions lived behind his face, how many things he did not say. Back at Harbor Point, Sophie returned to the afternoon session. Victoria remained in the lobby. Her phone rang. Jonathan Pierce. This time she answered. You vanished from the meeting. Sophie moved her foot. Silence. Then Jonathan's voice softened. Voluntarily, yes. Victoria. I know. That's good. She stared through the hallway window. Ethan was walking beside Sophie's wheelchair toward the therapy pool. Caleb trailed behind, carrying his backpack. It is. Jonathan paused. Who is the man with her? Victoria watched Ethan open the door and wait for Sophie to enter first. A facilities supervisor. Another pause. Jonathan said, I'm sorry. Victoria almost smiled. His name is Ethan Walker. What does a facilities supervisor have to do with Sophie's treatment? Victoria's eyes stayed on Ethan until the door closed behind him. I am still figuring that out. Jonathan did not answer for several seconds. Victoria could hear papers shifting on his end of the line. Then he said, A facilities supervisor. Yes. And you are allowing him into treatment discussions? Yes. Victoria. She closed her eyes. She knew that tone. Jonathan Pierce had been on the board since Bennett Dynamics was small enough to hold leadership meetings around one scratched conference table. He had watched her become the youngest person in the company, then the most dangerous, then the one everyone else eventually answered to. He rarely told her what to do. That was why she listened when he tried. "Jonathan, I am standing in a rehabilitation center where my daughter voluntarily moved her foot for the first time in 3 years. I understand that. No, you understand the sentence. I do not think you understand what it means." His voice softened. "I probably don't." Victoria looked toward the closed therapy pool doors. "Then trust me. I trust you. That is not the same as never questioning you." She said nothing. Jonathan continued, "Your judgment is part of what investors are buying when they buy into your company. If your personal life begins affecting that judgment, people are going to notice. My daughter is not a corporate risk." "I did not say she was." "You came close." "That is not fair." Victoria looked down at the floor. He was right. She hated when he was right. Jonathan sighed. "I'm not asking you to leave Seattle. I'm asking you to understand how this looks." Victoria watched Maya emerge from the therapy pool area carrying towels. A moment later, Ethan came out behind her, pushing Sophie. Caleb walked beside them, talking with his hands. Sophie was smiling, not widely, but enough. Victoria said, "Maybe I am done making decisions based on how things look." She ended the call. That evening, Sophie moved her foot again. 2 days later, she moved 2 toes. The movement was so small that Victoria almost missed it. Maya saw it. Ethan did too. Sophie was lying on the therapy mat with her eyes closed. Her right foot rested against a folded towel. Maya touched the side of her knee. "Find the cold spot." Sophie breathed in. Her toes tightened. Not much. A fraction. Then released. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Maya looked toward Ethan. Ethan did not smile. Again. Sophie tried. Nothing. Her jaw tightened. Ethan said, "Reset." She breathed. Again. This time the second toe moved. Sophie opened her eyes. She stared. Victoria felt tears building and immediately looked away. She remembered what Ethan had said. If every movement became everyone else's emotion, Sophie would stop owning it. So Victoria walked to the window. She stared at the rain. She counted to 10, then 15. When she turned back, Sophie was watching her. Victoria smiled. "Not too much. Good session." Sophie studied her, then nodded. That night, Victoria sat alone in the hotel suite while Sophie slept. She opened her laptop. She had 47 unread messages, 3 legal briefs, a financing proposal, 2 board memos, a request from her communications director. She closed the computer. The room became too quiet. Victoria walked toward the window. Seattle glowed below her in wet reflections. Headlights, office towers, ferries moving across black water. She thought about Sophie's toes. Then about Michael. He would have cried. Not discreetly, not elegantly. Michael had never believed emotions needed managing. He cried at movies, at Sophie's first day of school. Once, absurdly, because she had made him a birthday card where every letter in the word birthday was backward. Victoria had teased him for years. Now she would have given anything to hear that ridiculous laugh again. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Victoria turned. Sophie stood in the doorway of the bedroom, not physically stood. She was seated in her chair, one hand resting against the wheel. Her hair was messy from sleep. Victoria wiped quickly beneath one eye. "Hey." Sophie looked at her. "You okay?" A pause. Then Sophie wheeled closer. Her notebook was on her lap. She wrote, "You were crying." Victoria sat down. "Little bit." Sophie wrote again, "About my foot." Victoria looked at the words. "Partly." Sophie waited. Victoria should have stopped there. Instead, she said, "Your dad would have been so happy." Sophie's hand froze. Victoria saw it immediately, the change in her breathing, the way her fingers curled around the pen. Victoria regretted the words. "I'm sorry." Sophie shook her head. She wrote, "Do you think about him when I walk?" Victoria felt something inside her fold. "Yes." Sophie wrote again, "Do you think about him when I don't?" Victoria swallowed. "Yes." Sophie looked down. The pen stayed still. Victoria moved closer. "Sophie." Her daughter looked up. "Do you think I blame you?" Sophie did not move. Victoria's pulse changed. The question had been sitting inside her for 3 years. Not spoken, not written, not even fully acknowledged. Now it existed between them. Victoria continued quietly. Because I was driving. Sophie stared at her. Victoria forced herself not to look away. I have wondered that for a long time. Sophie lowered her eyes to the notebook. Her hand trembled slightly. She wrote slowly. I don't blame you. Victoria read it once, then again. Her vision blurred. She pressed her lips together. Sophie kept writing. I thought you blamed yourself. Victoria stopped breathing. Sophie wrote another line. And I thought if I talked about Dad, you would break. Victoria's face changed. All the discipline she had built over 3 years suddenly became useless. She reached for Sophie, then stopped herself. Can I? Sophie nodded. Victoria knelt beside the chair and pulled her daughter into her arms. Sophie rested her face against Victoria's shoulder. For a while, neither of them made a sound. Then Victoria whispered, You never have to protect me from missing him. Sophie's fingers tightened against the back of her shirt. Victoria continued, I am your mother. That is my job. A small voice came against her shoulder. I miss Dad. Victoria froze, not because Sophie had spoken, because of the words. Her daughter had said Dad. Victoria closed her eyes. So do I. Sophie began to cry. For the first time in 3 years, the grief had sound. Victoria held her tighter. The next morning, Sophie spoke to Ethan before anyone else had entered the therapy room. He was adjusting the height of a support bar. She rolled in. Morning. Ethan stopped. Very slowly, he turned. Sophie looked slightly embarrassed. Don't make it weird. His mouth moved. I was not planning to. You look like you were. I was deciding whether you were talking to me. I was. Then morning. That was all. Sophie seemed relieved. Victoria stood in the hallway and watched the exchange. Ethan eventually noticed her. He saw her face, saw the tears she was trying not to show. He stepped into the corridor. She talked to you. Victoria nodded. Last night. Something warm entered his expression. What did she say? Victoria looked through the glass. She said she missed her father. Ethan was quiet. Victoria stared at him. You knew. Knew what? That the silence had something to do with grief. I suspected. Why didn't you say anything? Because guessing about somebody else's pain doesn't make it mine to name. Victoria absorbed that. Then she asked, Why does she talk to you so easily? Ethan leaned against the wall. She doesn't. She spoke to you this morning like it was normal. That doesn't mean it is easy. Victoria crossed her arms. Then why you... Ethan considered the question. Because I wasn't in the car. Victoria looked away. There it was again. A sentence that found the exact place she had spent years protecting. I was driving. I know. I saw the light. I know. It was green. I know. If I had left 5 minutes later, Michael would still be alive. Ethan's face hardened slightly. Maybe. Victoria looked at him sharply. She had expected contradiction. Comfort. Something softer. He continued. Or another car hits you somewhere else. Or Michael gets sick. Or the world finds some other way to hurt you. That is not comforting. I'm not trying to comfort you. Then what are you doing? Trying to get you to stop pretending there was one perfect decision that would have controlled everything. She stared at him. That is easy for you to say. No. His voice changed. Quiet. Heavy. My wife got sick. Victoria said nothing. I spent 11 months trying to make the right decision every day. He looked toward the therapy room. Different doctor, different hospital, different drug, different diet, different specialist. His jaw tightened. I thought if I worked hard enough, researched enough, planned enough, I could outthink cancer. Victoria watched him. What happened? Emily died. The name hung between them. Ethan looked at the floor. And Caleb was 7 years old. Watching me act like every bad test result meant I had failed a mission. Victoria's arms slowly unfolded. Ethan met her eyes again. You can love someone and still not be able to save them, she whispered. I hate that. So do I. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Maya opened the therapy room door. We're ready. Sophie waited inside. Ethan straightened. The moment ended. But something between him and Victoria had changed. The following week, Sophie stood for 5 seconds with support, then 9, then 13. Maya kept the sessions controlled. Ethan kept them small. Victoria kept trying not to interfere. That was the part she was worst at. One Thursday afternoon, Sophie had already completed 35 minutes of work. Her legs were trembling. Sweat darkened the hair near her temples. Maya said, "We're done." Sophie shook her head. Victoria stood near the wall. "She has another one." Ethan looked at her. "No." Victoria frowned. "She just held 12 seconds. She's fatigued." She held 12. "And now we're done." Sophie looked between them. Victoria stepped closer. "One more attempt." Ethan's voice remained calm. "Victoria, she wants to." Sophie nodded quickly. Ethan looked at her. "Do you want to, or do you want your mom to be proud of you?" The room went still. Victoria's face tightened. "That is inappropriate." Ethan did not look at her. He looked at Sophie. Sophie gripped the parallel bars. She started to push herself upright. Maya moved into position. Slow. Sophie rose. For 2 seconds it looked good. Then her right leg began shaking. Ethan stepped forward. "Sit." Sophie ignored him. Victoria whispered, "You can do it." Ethan looked at her. "Stop." Sophie tried to straighten. Her left knee collapsed. Everything happened at once. Maya caught her upper body. Ethan caught her hips. Sophie fell against the padded platform. Not hard, but hard enough. She made a sharp sound. Victoria rushed forward. "Sophie." Her daughter shoved her hands away. Victoria stopped. Sophie looked terrified. Not physically injured. Terrified. The fear was old, deep, the kind that did not belong only to this room. Maya checked her carefully. No injury. Victoria crouched. "Baby." Sophie reached for the notebook. Her hand shook. She wrote one sentence. "I can't do this." Victoria's heart dropped. Ethan sat on the floor several feet away. He did not move closer. "You don't have to." Sophie looked at him. Victoria turned. "What are you saying?" Ethan kept his eyes on Sophie. "You don't have to do anything today." Sophie wrote, "Ever." Victoria stepped forward. "No." Ethan looked at her. She continued, "She does not mean that. Maybe she does right now." "Do not put words in her mouth." "I'm reading the words she wrote." Victoria's fear became anger before she could stop it. "You pushed her into believing this was possible." Ethan's expression changed. "I did not push her. You built this entire program around a signal you found." "I noticed a signal. You told us there was something to work with." "There is." "Then why is she on the floor?" Ethan stood. "Because recovery includes falling. She is not one of your soldiers." Silence. Maya looked down. Sophie stopped writing. Ethan's face became unreadable. Victoria knew immediately she had hit something. He took one breath, then another. "You're right." His voice was flat. "She isn't." He picked up a towel from the floor and handed it to Maya. Then he walked out. Victoria watched the door close. She wanted to go after him. She did not. Sophie refused the next morning. She refused the afternoon, too. The following day, she came to Harbor Point but would not enter therapy room 4. On the third day, Maya tried the temperature work. Sophie participated. Nothing moved, not her foot, not her toes, nothing. Victoria felt panic rising so fast she could taste it. Maya touched her arm. "Do not read too much into 3 days." Victoria pulled away. "You don't know that." "No, I don't." "Neither does Ethan." Maya looked toward the hallway. "He hasn't been in a session since Thursday." Victoria knew. She had noticed every absence. Ethan still worked. She saw him repairing a pool lift, replacing a damaged rail, walking Caleb through the lobby after school. He did not approach Sophie. He did not approach Victoria. On Monday afternoon, Dr. Hart found Victoria sitting alone in the cafeteria. "You're angry with him." Victoria looked up. "I'm angry with myself." "That sounds more accurate." Victoria almost laughed. Hart sat across from her. "What did he do in the Navy?" Victoria's attention sharpened. Hart was quiet for a moment. "I asked him once." "And?" He did not answer. Then why are you bringing it up? Because after your argument, I looked more closely at the references he gave when he applied here. Victoria waited. Hart continued. One came from a military rehabilitation physician in San Diego. Victoria's face changed. He worked in rehabilitation, not formally. What does that mean? It means he was injured during his service. After that, he spent a great deal of time around wounded operators. Operators? Hart looked at her. That was the word in the reference. Victoria leaned back. Special operations. I would assume so. Victoria thought of Ethan choosing the chair nearest the door, catching the water glass without looking, the way he watched a falling body, the sealed parts of his past she had not yet uncovered. Hart continued. The physician wrote that Ethan had an unusual ability to notice movement compensation and keep injured men engaged through long recoveries. Victoria looked toward the hallway. He never told me. Maybe he didn't think it mattered. It matters. To Sophie. Victoria looked at her. Hart held her gaze. Or to you. Victoria stood. She found Ethan in the equipment room. He was kneeling beside an open motor housing. For a moment, the scene looked exactly like the first day she had spoken to him. Gray shirt, tools, quiet hands. He did not look up. If you are here to fire me, Dr. Hart has to do that. Victoria closed the door. I'm sorry. His hand stopped. He looked at her. She continued. What I said about Sophie not being one of your soldiers. Ethan returned his attention to the motor. She isn't. I know. He tightened a screw. Victoria stepped closer. I was scared. So was I. She stared at him. You don't look scared. He gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. People keep confusing that with not being scared. Victoria leaned against the workbench. Dr. Hart told me you were injured. Ethan became still. She shouldn't have. She didn't tell me details. Good. What happened? He looked at her. No. Victoria almost argued, then stopped. He noticed. That's new. What? You accepting no? Don't get used to it. This time he did smile. Barely. Victoria looked down at the toolbox. Sophie has not moved her foot since Thursday. I know. How? Maya told me. You asked. Every day. Victoria's expression softened. Then why haven't you gone in? Because if I walk in now, she thinks coming back is about me. What if she needs you? Then she knows where I am. Victoria looked at him for a long time, and if she never comes back, Ethan rested both hands on the bench. Then we respect that. Victoria shook her head. You can really do that. No. He looked toward the door. But sometimes loving somebody means not turning your fear into their obligation. The words settled into the room. Victoria whispered, You learned that from Emily. Ethan nodded once. Too late. Victoria wanted to reach for him. She did not. Instead, she stood beside him in the silence. No speeches, no solutions. Just two people who had spent years mistaking love for rescue. The next morning, Victoria arrived at Harbor Point at 7:40. Sophie was already awake. Her notebook rested on her lap. She looked toward therapy room 4. Victoria did not ask. Sophie wheeled forward. Maya saw her approaching and opened the door. Ethan was inside, adjusting a support strap. He looked up. Sophie stopped. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Sophie said, Can we start? Ethan stared at her. His eyes moved once toward Victoria. Victoria stayed in the hallway. She did not step forward, did not encourage, did not ask what Sophie wanted to try. Ethan looked back at Sophie. Yeah. He pulled the stool into position. We can start. Sophie rolled inside. Victoria remained where she was. The door stayed open. For once, she did not need to cross it. For the next several days, Victoria stayed outside the room, not because anyone asked her to, because Sophie had. Not with words, with the simple fact that every morning she rolled through the doorway without looking back. Victoria learned to understand that. There were mornings when parenting meant stepping closer. There were mornings when it meant staying exactly where you were. Inside therapy room 4. Sophie returned to the beginning. Cold, warm, pressure, intent, rest. Again. Ethan did not treat her return as a victory. He did not mention the fall. He did not ask whether she was afraid. He simply sat on the same low stool and said, "Tell me when you feel it." Sophie closed her eyes. Maya placed the cool pack against the outside of her knee. One finger rose, they moved lower. Nothing. Back again. One finger. The work was almost painfully small. Victoria stood behind the glass and watched her daughter rebuild something nobody could see. By the end of the week, Sophie's toes moved again. Then her foot. The first time it happened, she opened her eyes immediately. Ethan shook his head. "You looked." "I wanted to see." "Your foot already knows where it is." Sophie frowned. "Mine doesn't." "Fair." He repositioned the towel beneath her heel. Again. This time, the foot shifted nearly 2 inches. Sophie stared at Ethan. He stared back. Nothing dramatic passed between them. That was what made Victoria trust the moment. Later in the hallway, Sophie caught up with Ethan while he was carrying a box toward the storage room. "Ethan." He stopped. She was still getting used to using her voice. Some words came easily now. Some days she spoke several sentences. Other days she returned to the notebook. Nobody pushed. "What?" Sophie glanced toward the therapy room. "How far are the bars?" "Which part?" "From one end to the other." "About 8 feet." She looked down at her legs. Ethan shifted the box to one arm. "Why?" Sophie shrugged. He waited. She looked toward the hallway where Victoria was talking with Maya, then back at Ethan. "I want to walk it." "Eventually." "No." Her voice was quiet but firm. "The whole thing." Ethan studied her. "That is eventually." Sophie shook her head. "I want to do it before Mom sees." He said nothing. She continued. "I want to walk to her." Ethan lowered the box to the floor. "Sophie." "I know." "No, you don't know what I am going to say." "You are going to say we don't know if I can." "Correct." "I know that." "You are going to say it has to be safe." "I was going to say that too. Maya can help." "Also true." Sophie reached for her notebook, then stopped. She chose her voice instead. "Everybody always knows before me." Ethan frowned slightly. She continued. "The doctors know before me. Mom knows before me. The therapists know before me. Every time something changes, everybody is watching." Her eyes lowered. "I want one thing to be mine first." Ethan understood. Victoria could have spent hours explaining Sophie's medical history. Maya could have shown him every chart. None of it would have said what those words did. Ethan crouched beside her chair. "Then we make it yours." Sophie looked up. "But we do it right?" She nodded. "And if Maya says stop, we stop." Another nod. "If your body says stop, we stop before Maya has to." Sophie hesitated. "Okay. And no pretending pain is courage." She made a face. "I don't do that." "You absolutely do." "No. Your mother does too." Sophie almost smiled. "I know. Do not tell her I said that." "I might." Ethan picked up the box. Sophie called after him. "Ethan." He turned. "Thank you." He nodded. "Show up tomorrow." She did. Maya was reluctant when Ethan told her, not because the goal was unreasonable, because Sophie wanted secrecy. "I do not like hiding clinical progress from her mother." "We are not hiding records." Maya looked at him. "You know exactly what I mean." Ethan glanced toward Sophie, who was stretching several feet away. "She wants to own the first successful attempt. And if Victoria asks me directly, you tell her Sophie is progressing. That is evasive." "Yes." Maya folded her arms. "You have spent too much time around classified information." Ethan said nothing. Maya's expression changed. She had meant it as a joke. Ethan picked up a support strap. "Can we work?" She watched him for another second, then let it go. The first attempt lasted less than 10 seconds. Sophie got upright between the bars. Her legs shook. She shifted weight onto the right. The left foot moved half an inch. Then her arms gave out. Maya lowered her safely. Sophie looked furious. Ethan handed her water. "Good." She glared at him. "You always say that when something goes badly." "Because sometimes bad is useful." "It was terrible. It was information. I hate information." "That explains math." Sophie stared at him, then laughed. The next morning she made one step. 2 days later, 2. The distance was nowhere near 8 feet. but the steps were beginning to look less like accidents. The pattern was there: shift, brace, move, breathe, reset. Maya began making tiny chalk marks beside the bars, not as trophies. Measurements: 20 inches, 32, 40, then 4 feet. Sophie watched the numbers grow. Caleb became involved by accident. He arrived after school one afternoon and found a piece of paper sticking out of Sophie's notebook. He pulled it free. At the top, she had written 8 feet. Below it were smaller distances with dates. Caleb looked at her. "What is this?" Sophie grabbed for the page. He held it away. "You're walking the bars. Give it back." "You are." "Caleb." His face changed from teasing to amazement. "How far?" She looked toward Ethan. He was across the room talking with Maya. Sophie lowered her voice. 4 feet. Caleb stared. "That is half." "I know. That is literally half. I know what half means." He looked at the bars, then back at her. "When are you telling your mom?" "When I can finish." Caleb nodded slowly. Then he pulled a pencil from his backpack. "What are you doing?" "Helping." He turned the page over and wrote in large letters, 8 feet is not Mars." Sophie stared at it. "What does that even mean?" "Mars is far." "I know. 8 feet is not." "That is stupid. It is motivational. It is extremely stupid." Caleb grinned. "You smiled." "I did not." "You did." Sophie took the page. She folded it carefully and placed it back inside the notebook. That evening, Ethan found the paper while Sophie was in the pool. He read it, then looked at Caleb. 8 feet is not Mars." Caleb shrugged. She needed perspective. "From you. I am very wise. You left your lunchbox at school twice this week. Wise people forget things." Ethan shook his head. But he kept the paper exactly where Sophie had placed it. At home that night, Caleb sat at the kitchen table doing spelling homework while Ethan cooked pasta. "Dad." "Yeah. Are you leaving?" Ethan stopped stirring the sauce. He did not turn around. "What, California?" Ethan looked at him. "Who told you about California?" "I saw the email." "You read my email. It was open." "That does not answer the question." "I saw the subject." Ethan turned off the stove. A private rehabilitation company near San Diego had contacted him 2 weeks earlier. The offer was serious. Good salary, better benefits. A formal role designing veteran recovery programs alongside licensed specialists. It was the kind of job someone with his background should have taken years ago. He had not answered. Caleb watched him. "Are we moving?" "No decision." "Do you want to—" Ethan leaned against the counter. "I don't know." Caleb looked down at his worksheet. "I like Seattle." "I know." "I like my school." "I know." A pause. "I like Sophie." Ethan looked at him. Caleb shrugged. "And Victoria." "You barely know Victoria." "She lets me order pancakes." "That is not a personality test." "Pretty good one." Ethan returned to the stove. Caleb went back to writing. Neither noticed that Sophie would hear about California before Ethan decided what it meant. 3 days later, Caleb mentioned it while he and Sophie were sitting in the Harbor Point lobby. "My dad might get a job in California." Sophie's pen stopped. She looked up. "What?" Caleb immediately realized something. "I don't know if he is taking it." Sophie stared at him. "He didn't tell you." "No, I saw it." She closed the notebook. "Where in California?" "San Diego, I think." Her face became still. Caleb leaned closer. "He is probably not going." "Why?" "I don't know." "Then how do you know?" "I said probably." Sophie turned toward the hallway. Ethan was helping a technician move a large piece of equipment. He laughed at something the man said. Sophie watched him. Caleb said quietly, "Soph." She wheeled away. That afternoon she trained harder than usual, Maya noticed. "Soften your shoulders." Sophie ignored her. "Slow down." She pushed upright. Her right foot moved, then left. The step was messy. She forced another. Ethan stood near the end of the bars. "Stop!" Sophie kept moving. "Sophie!" She tried a third step. Her knee shook. Ethan stepped closer. "Sit." "No." The word came sharp. He stopped. Maya looked between them. Sophie held herself upright. "Again." Ethan's eyes narrowed. This is not how we work. You said 8 feet is a decision. I did not say that. Close enough. No. She glared at him. He looked at Maya. Session ends. Sophie shouted, No. The room went silent. Victoria was not there. She was downtown at a Bennett Dynamics meeting. Caleb sat outside the room and heard everything. Sophie tightened her grip on the bars. You're leaving. Ethan froze. Maya looked at him. What? California. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Caleb, Sophie continued. So I have to do it before you leave. He walked closer. No. Yes. No, you don't. You are going. I have not decided anything. That means maybe. Yes. Her eyes filled. Ethan lowered his voice. Sophie, look at me. She refused. Look at me. Eventually she did. You do not walk because I might leave. She swallowed. You do not talk because I might stay. Her grip tightened. You do this because your body belongs to you. Her voice shook. People leave. Ethan said nothing. Your wife left. Maya inhaled. Sophie immediately looked ashamed. Ethan's face did not change. She died. I know. Your dad died. Sophie's eyes lowered. Ethan continued. That does not mean everybody who matters disappears. She whispered. Sometimes they do. He nodded. Sometimes. He crouched beside the bars. That is why you do not build your legs around me. Sophie looked at him. You build them around you. She started crying, not loudly. Ethan waited. After a long time, she said, I want to finish. Not today. Please. No. She looked angry again. Good. Anger was easier than fear. Ethan held out his hand. Sit. This time Sophie obeyed. The secret training continued. But something had changed. Sophie no longer thought of the 8 feet as proof that Ethan had to stay. She wanted it for another reason now. She wanted to choose where she went. A week later she crossed 6 feet. Maya said nothing. Ethan said nothing. Sophie sat down and stared at the final 2 feet. Caleb waited outside with the folded Mars note. The following Tuesday, Victoria's downtown meeting ended 40 minutes early. She considered going back to the hotel. Instead, she told the driver to take her to Harbor Point. She did not call ahead. The rain had returned. By the time she walked through the front doors, she was answering a call from her CFO. They accepted the revised structure. Good. We need your approval on the financing language. Send it. I already did. Victoria stepped into the elevator. And Victoria London wants confirmation before 5. Tell London they will have it. The doors opened. She walked toward therapy room 4. Her phone was still against her ear. Then she noticed the empty wheelchair. It sat outside the parallel bars. Victoria stopped. Her CFO kept talking. She lowered the phone. Inside the room, Sophie stood upright. Maya was near the wall. Ethan stood 8 feet away. He saw Victoria first. His face changed. Sophie noticed. She turned. Victoria's portfolio slipped from beneath her arm. Papers scattered across the floor. Sophie! Her daughter's face went pale. The plan had not included this. For 1 second, panic replaced everything. Her knees began shaking. Victoria moved toward the doorway. Sophie, sit down. Ethan looked at her. Don't. Victoria froze. Sophie gripped the bars. Her breathing became quick. Ethan shifted his attention back to her. Your choice, Soph. She swallowed. Bars or me? Victoria stared at him. Sophie looked toward her mother, then at Ethan. Maya whispered, You can stop. Sophie shook her head. She released her right hand. Victoria's heart slammed against her ribs. Then Sophie released the left. For 1 impossible second she stood without the bars. Her whole body trembled. Ethan lowered himself slightly. Find the right. Sophie shifted her weight. Her right foot moved. Victoria covered her mouth. 6 inches. Then the left. Sophie swayed. Ethan did not move. Another step. Victoria whispered, Oh my God. Sophie looked at Ethan. Not because she wanted him more than her mother, because he was the point she had trained herself to focus on. Still, calm, unmoving. Step 4. Then 5. Her breathing turned ragged. She was moving faster than Maya liked now. Not running, she could not run, but urgency had entered the movement. Sophie wanted the distance gone. Her left knee buckled. Victoria rushed forward. Ethan turned his head. "Don't." The words stopped her. Something in his voice carried a command that did not belong in a therapy room. Victoria obeyed before she understood why. Sophie caught herself. She dragged in a breath, then moved again. The last step collapsed into a stumble. Ethan caught her, instantly. One arm around her back, one beneath her ribs. Her feet left the floor for half a second. Then he lowered her weight safely against him. Sophie wrapped her arms around his neck. Her entire body shook. Victoria could not move. 3 years. 3 years of specialists. 3 years of machines. 3 years of waking up every morning and asking the world for something it refused to give. And now her daughter was standing inside another person's arms. Sophie buried her face in Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan!" Her voice was weak. He closed his eyes. "Yeah, don't leave." Victoria's expression changed. Ethan opened his eyes. He looked at Victoria over Sophie's shoulder, then back at Sophie. "I'm right here." Sophie held him tighter. Ethan did not promise California. He did not promise forever. He gave her the only thing he knew he could give honestly, the present. After a moment, Sophie pulled back. She looked toward Victoria. Her face changed. The reason she had practiced returned. "Mom." Victoria's knees nearly failed. Sophie reached for the bar. Ethan steadied her. "You have nothing to prove." "I know." She looked at her mother. "I want to." Ethan nodded. He held out one hand. Sophie took it. She moved slowly across the remaining space. One step, then another. Victoria sank to the floor. Not because anyone told her to, because she could no longer stand. Sophie crossed the final few feet with Ethan beside her. Then she let go of his hand. She took one step alone. Victoria reached up. Sophie fell into her arms. Victoria buried her face in her daughter's hair. "I'm right here," Sophie cried. "So am I." Victoria's eyes closed. Across the room, Ethan turned away. Maya faced the window. Nobody tried to make the moment bigger. It was already too large for the room. 3 nights later, Victoria sat at the hotel dining table reviewing notes for the Bennett Foundation Gala. Sophie rolled in. Victoria looked up. "You should be asleep." Sophie placed the notebook on the table. "I know. You are using your voice more. That does not mean the notebook is exempt from bedtime." Sophie slid it toward her. Victoria read, "I want to go Saturday." She looked up. "To the gala?" Sophie nodded. Victoria leaned back. There would be 400 guests. Press, cameras, donors, executives. People who knew how to turn one private moment into a public symbol. "That's a lot of people." "I know. You hate crowded rooms." "I know." "Then why—" Sophie took the notebook. She wrote again, "I want them to see me." Victoria's chest tightened. "Why?" Sophie answered aloud. "Because they have heard about me for 3 years." Victoria stared. Sophie continued, "Everybody knows your daughter got hurt." She looked at her legs. "They don't know me." Victoria closed the laptop. "What do you want them to see?" Sophie looked toward the window. "That I am still here." Victoria did not answer immediately. Then Sophie added, "Can Ethan and Caleb come?" Victoria smiled faintly. "I'll ask." Ethan's reaction was exactly what she expected. "No." Victoria stood across from him in the Harbor Point cafeteria. "No." 400 people. "Yes." Press. "Yes." She walked 8 feet once. More than once now. "That is not the point." "What is—" "The room changes the cost." Victoria folded her arms. Ethan continued, "If she freezes here, she has me. You 4 walls. If she freezes in front of 400 people, she feels every eye. I know." "Does she—" "I think she understands being watched better than either of us." Ethan looked away. Victoria softened her voice. "She spent 3 years while adults discussed her body in rooms where she was sitting 5 feet away." He looked back. "She wants to choose the terms this time." Ethan rubbed his jaw. "What exactly is she planning?" Victoria hesitated. "She asked how far it is from the side of the stage to where I stand after the speech." Ethan went still. "How far?" 25 feet. He stared at her. Absolutely not. Victoria almost smiled. Interesting. What? You just told me it has to be her decision. It does not mean I have to think it is a good one. Then tell her. I will. He did. Sophie listened. 25 feet was more than triple what she had done safely. Ethan explained fatigue, adrenaline, noise, balance, the possibility of falling. Sophie listened to all of it. Then said, "Okay." Ethan waited. She continued, "I still want to try." He looked at Maya. Maya sighed. "We set contingencies." Ethan nodded. "A chair at the stage?" "Yes." "Clear path?" "Yes." "No one touches her unless she asks or she is actually falling." Victoria's face tightened. Ethan looked at her. "Especially you." She exhaled. "Fine." Caleb's concern was different. "I don't have gala clothes." Victoria looked at him. "I can fix that." Ethan immediately said no. Victoria turned. "What? You are not buying him $1,000 suit?" "I was not planning to." Caleb looked between them. "I would wear one." Ethan ignored him. Victoria said, "I know a store." "Normal store?" "Define normal." "Victoria." She smiled. "I will behave." Saturday night arrived cold and clear. The ballroom overlooked downtown Seattle. Lights from the waterfront reflected against the dark windows. Victoria stood near the entrance greeting donors while Sophie sat beside Caleb near a table covered in silent auction items. Caleb wore a navy blazer. Ethan wore a dark suit that fit too well to look unfamiliar. Victoria noticed. "You clean up suspiciously well." Ethan looked at her dress. "So do you." "I do this professionally." "Apparently." For several seconds, they simply looked at one another. Victoria felt something warm and dangerous move through her. Then Caleb appeared between them. "Are you two done being weird?" Ethan looked down. "Go find Sophie." "I was sent to find you." "By who?" "Sophie." Ethan's face changed immediately. They crossed the ballroom. Sophie sat near the stage with Maya. Her hands were perfectly still. Victoria knew that sign. Decision, not fear. The program began at 8. Awards, videos, donor acknowledgments. Victoria stood backstage listening to her name being announced. Ethan waited several feet away with Caleb. Before Victoria stepped onto the stage, Ethan said quietly, "You okay?" She looked at him. "No." "Good." She almost laughed. "That is becoming your favorite answer." "It is honest." Victoria walked to the podium. She thanked the medical teams, the foundation staff, the donors. She spoke about access to rehabilitation, about families forced to choose between treatment and financial survival. She did not mention Sophie's accident. She never used her daughter as fundraising material. When she finished, applause filled the ballroom. Victoria stepped away. Then a voice came from the side of the stage. "My name is Sophie Bennett." Victoria stopped. 400 people became silent. Sophie stood beside a chair. Maya held the microphone near her. Victoria had not known she planned to speak. Neither had Ethan. Sophie looked small beneath the lights, but her voice carried. 3 years ago I stopped walking. A pause. I stopped talking too. Victoria pressed a hand to her chest. Sophie looked toward her. "I thought if I did not try things I could not lose them again." The room was completely still. Then Sophie looked toward Ethan. "Somebody taught me that trying does not mean you know what happens." Ethan lowered his eyes. "It just means you are still in the conversation." Sophie swallowed. "My mom never stopped showing up." Victoria's face folded. "And Ethan never pretended he could promise me anything." She handed the microphone back to Maya, then she gripped the chair. Victoria understood. Now. Sophie let go. She stepped away from the stage. One shallow stare, then another. Her right foot reached the ballroom floor. 25 feet. Ethan appeared beside Victoria, not in front of Sophie, beside Victoria. Sophie's first step was slow. Second, third. The audience did not clap. Nobody dared. At 10 feet, her arms began to rise for balance. Victoria's breathing changed. Ethan noticed. "Stay," she whispered. "I am." At 15 feet, Sophie paused. 2 full seconds, then moved again. 18, 20. Her left knee buckled. The room gasped. Victoria stepped forward. Ethan touched her elbow, not holding, reminding. Let her choose. Sophie swayed. Her face tightened in anger. She looked at the floor, then straightened. Victoria stopped moving. Sophie took another step, then another. The final distance disappeared. She reached Victoria. Her mother caught her. The ballroom erupted. Not polite applause. Something louder, messier. People stood. Some cried. Caleb was already crying and denying it to anyone who looked at him. I knew she would do it. Ethan stood several feet behind Victoria. His expression remained controlled. Almost. Victoria looked over Sophie's shoulder. Their eyes met. For 1 second, the entire ballroom seemed to disappear. Victoria knew exactly who had helped return her daughter to her, and she knew he would hate being credited for it. The first video appeared online before dessert. By midnight, millions had seen it. By Sunday afternoon, every local station was playing the clip. The girl walking, the billionaire mother crying, the silent ballroom, the near fall, and the man standing beside Victoria, calm, watching, never reaching unless needed. By Monday morning, the internet had a question. Who is Ethan Walker? Victoria's phone rang at 6:12. Jonathan. She answered from the hotel kitchen. What? I found him. She looked toward Sophie's bedroom. What do you mean? Your facilities supervisor. Victoria became still. Jonathan sent an image. Her phone vibrated. She opened it. The photograph was old, dusty. A group of men in combat gear stood beneath a brutal sun. Most of their faces were difficult to see. One was not. Ethan. Younger, heavier beard, different eyes, but unmistakably Ethan. Victoria stared at the insignia. Jonathan said quietly, he spent nearly 15 years in naval special warfare. Victoria's throat tightened. What unit? Jonathan paused. Navy SEALs. She sat down. Jonathan continued. Multiple deployments. Much of the record is sealed. Several commendations. A serious injury near the end of his service. Victoria looked again at the photograph. Anything about rehabilitation? Enough. Jonathan's voice changed. He worked with injured operators during recovery. One physician described his movement retraining approach as something teams kept using after he left. Victoria closed her eyes. The gray shirt, the chair near the exit, the body mechanics, the command in his voice, do not move, the way he caught Sophie. Every strange detail aligned at once. Jonathan said, the man knows exactly what he is doing. Victoria stared at the morning light appearing over Seattle. I know. You knew he was a SEAL? No. Then what did you know? She thought of Sophie whispering that Ethan did not look sorry for her. I knew his job title was not telling me who he was. At Harbor Point that evening, Ethan was alone in the equipment room. Victoria stepped inside. He did not look up. I wondered how long it would take. She closed the door. For what? For somebody to find the photograph. Victoria stared at him. You were a SEAL. He tightened a bolt on a wheelchair assembly. Yes. 14 years. Yes. You were injured. His hands stopped. Yes. You worked with wounded operators during rehabilitation. He looked at her. Sometimes. Victoria let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You spent weeks telling me you knew a little. I do know a little. Compared to who? Doctors. You found something 11 specialists missed. I noticed something 11 specialists had different reasons to interpret differently. There you go again. What? Making yourself smaller. Ethan stood. I am not making myself smaller. Then why didn't you tell me? His expression hardened. Because it did not matter. It mattered to me. No. He stepped closer. It mattered to your curiosity. Victoria went still. Ethan continued. Sophie did not need a Navy SEAL. What did she need? He looked through the small window in the door. Sophie and Caleb sat in the hallway playing cards. Sophie was accusing Caleb of cheating. Caleb was defending himself badly. Ethan's face softened. She needed someone who kept coming back. Victoria looked at him. The answer was so simple that it hurt. She glanced toward the children, then back at Ethan. Are you taking the California job? His eyes shifted. So she told you. Caleb told Sophie. Sophie told me. Ethan sighed. Of course. Are you? I haven't decided. Victoria felt disappointment before she could stop it. She hated that he could see it. Ethan said quietly, "This is why I did not want anybody building anything around me." Victoria's eyes met his. "You think that's what this is?" "I think Sophie is attached. She loves you." He flinched almost invisibly. Victoria continued, "Caleb loves her. I know. And I—" She stopped. The room changed. Ethan did not help her finish. Victoria looked away. For perhaps the first time in her life, she could not force the right words into existence. Instead, she said, "You should decide what you want." Ethan's voice was quiet. "That is harder than deciding what is safe." Victoria looked back at him. "I know." For several seconds they stood surrounded by toolboxes, spare wheelchair parts, folded therapy mats, and every ordinary object that had hidden Ethan Walker in plain sight. Then Sophie called from the hallway. "Ethan, Caleb is cheating," Caleb shouted. "I am not." Ethan closed his eyes. Victoria smiled. "Sounds urgent." "Very." He opened the door. Sophie pointed at the cards. "He has 2 aces of hearts." Caleb looked offended. "The deck came like that." Ethan sat beside them. "No deck comes like that." "This one did." Victoria leaned against the doorway and watched. Sophie talking, Caleb arguing, Ethan trying not to laugh. Nothing about the scene looked miraculous. That was what made it feel real. By Tuesday morning, the photograph had become impossible to contain. Reporters were waiting outside Harbor Point before sunrise. 2 news vans parked across the street. Someone had found an old military commendation. Someone else had found a grainy photograph from San Diego. By noon, Ethan Walker was no longer the quiet facilities supervisor nobody noticed. He was the former Navy SEAL who had helped a billionaire's daughter walk. Ethan hated every word of that sentence. He stood in Dr. Hart's office with his arms folded while Victoria watched him stare through the blinds. "They are going to make this sound like I cured her." Victoria said, "Then we correct them. They will not care. Some will." He looked at her. "And the parents who hear miracle." Victoria understood. That was different. By the end of the week, Harbor Point had received hundreds of messages from families asking for Ethan. Not the therapy department, not the physicians. Ethan, a father from Arizona, wanted to bring his son to Seattle immediately. A mother from Ohio sent medical records and asked whether Ethan could look at one video. One message simply said, "Please tell me you can do for my daughter what you did for Sophie." Ethan read that one twice, then put the phone down. "I cannot be that person." Victoria sat across from him. "You do not have to be. People need somebody to blame when hope goes wrong. You are not selling hope. Doesn't matter if they are buying it anyway." Dr. Hart arranged a short press statement. She explained that Sophie's injury had always been incomplete, that residual neurological pathways had been confirmed through clinical testing, that Maya and the medical team directed treatment, that Ethan had contributed observation experience and patient engagement. Ethan insisted on one final sentence. Sophie did the work. The clip traveled almost as widely as the gala footage, but the attention did not disappear. A month later, a donor approached Harbor Point about funding a pilot program. The idea was simple: bring together licensed rehabilitation specialists, pediatric patients, veterans, and families. Use conventional clinical care, but create more space for small neurological signals patient choice and long-term engagement. Victoria offered to fund the first year through the Bennett Foundation. Ethan resisted. Of course he did. "You cannot build a program around Sophie." Victoria said, "I am not. That is what everyone will think." "Then we build it around the patients." He looked at Dr. Hart. She nodded. "Clinical decisions stay clinical." Maya added, "And nobody promises walking." Ethan was quiet. Victoria said, "What else?" He looked at her. "What happens to the people who do not improve?" The room became still. Ethan continued, "If this becomes a place where everybody celebrates the kid who walks and quietly forgets the kid who doesn't, I want nothing to do with it." Victoria leaned forward. "Then we design it so that never happens." They did. The first child Ethan worked with in the pilot program did not improve the way Sophie had. His name was Noah, 11 years old. Spinal injury from a diving accident, bright, sarcastic, tired of being inspirational. For 6 weeks, Noah worked. Nothing dramatic happened. No voluntary movement, no breakthrough, no viral moment. Ethan took it harder than he admitted. Sophie noticed. She found him alone one evening in therapy room 4, stacking foam blocks that were already stacked correctly. "You are doing the staring thing." Ethan looked at her. "What staring thing?" "The one Caleb talks about." He sighed. "Great. Family Intelligence Network." Sophie moved closer. "Noah is mad." "I know. You are mad too." "I know, because he is not moving." Ethan sat on the low platform. Sophie watched him. Then she said, "You told me results and trying were not the same thing." He looked at her. "Apparently I am better at saying it." Sophie shrugged. "Then practice." For a moment Ethan said nothing. Then he laughed. A real laugh. That sounded annoyingly familiar. I learned from annoying people. That evening he sat with Noah and changed the goal. Not walking, not movement, control over something else. Transfers, upper body strength, independence, the right to decide what success meant. Noah still did not walk. But 3 months later he transferred into his chair without help for the first time. His mother cried. Noah rolled his eyes. Ethan looked toward Sophie standing in the doorway. She smiled. Some victories look different when you stopped forcing them to wear the same shape. The relationship between Victoria and Ethan changed more quietly. There was no dramatic declaration. There were dinners, school pickups, coffee left on desks, Caleb falling asleep on Victoria's couch, Sophie calling Ethan because a wheel on her chair squeaked and refusing to admit she simply wanted him to come over. One Friday evening, Victoria found Ethan alone on the back patio of her house overlooking Lake Washington. The children were inside arguing over a movie. She handed him coffee. "You never answered me." He looked at her. That narrows it down to about 40 questions. "California." He stared at the water. "No." Victoria waited. He continued. "I turned it down." "Because of Sophie?" "Partly." "Caleb?" "Partly." She looked at him. Ethan smiled faintly. "You really want me to finish this?" "Yes." He set the coffee down. "Because of you." Victoria went completely still. Ethan watched her. "You are surprisingly bad at this part." "What part?" "Not being in control." She stepped closer. "I am excellent at being in control. That is the problem." She kissed him before he could say anything else. It was not urgent, not dramatic. Just two people who had spent years protecting what remained, finally choosing something new. 1 year later, Sophie walked to a podium at Harbor Point using braces. Nobody gasped. Nobody lifted a phone. That pleased her. She looked out at the families gathered for the pilot program's first anniversary. "People ask what Ethan taught me." Ethan stood beside Caleb near the back. Sophie smiled. "He never told me everything was possible." She paused. "He taught me that an old answer is not always the last answer." Victoria looked down. Sophie continued. "And my mom taught me that strong people are allowed to need people." Victoria laughed through her tears. That night, the 4 of them ate takeout at Victoria's house. Caleb accused Sophie of stealing the last dumpling. Sophie claimed strategic ownership. Ethan told both of them to stop turning dinner into a courtroom. Later, Sophie handed Victoria a folded piece of paper. Victoria opened it. 4 pairs of shoes were drawn beside the same front door. Her heels, Ethan's work boots, Sophie's sneakers, Caleb's battered high tops. Above them, Sophie had written one word: home. Victoria looked toward the kitchen. Ethan was helping Caleb search for missing homework. Sophie waited beside her. For 3 years, Victoria had believed the miracle she wanted was to see her daughter walk again. Now she looked around the noisy house. The bags on the floor, the coffee mugs, the therapy bands over a chair, the people who had chosen to stay. And she understood that walking had only opened the door. This was where Sophie had been trying to go.